So, last class we have discussed about excavation and the major hazard or risk with respect to excavation in terms of safety is primarily cave-ins and the fatality with related to cave-ins. So, we have discussed different forms of excavation, like for example bulk excavation or trenches, and we have discussed all the safety precautions with regard to the same. So, in continuation, now let us discuss some of the other hazards. So, in a way we call it as a confined space. Confined space is a major hazard when, especially when you are doing a very narrow excavation or maybe in terms of tunnels. Confined spaces are a real big hazard. So, we will discuss about confined spaces first and then the different hazards in regard to tunneling excavation. Okay. So, we will talk about different types of tunnel excavation and also on micro tunneling also we will discuss. Okay. So, now let us discuss what is a confined space. OSHA defines confined space as a very enclosed space which is partially closed or completely enclosed space which is not intended primarily as a place of work. Okay. You cannot work there for 8 hours per day or something like that. So, some of the characteristic features of a confined space, it is large enough for entry or exit, maybe for 1 or 2 workers, and it is not designed for continuous worker occupancy, which is what I said. So, you cannot stay there for beyond certain duration unless there is a demand on doing it. Examples for confined space: manhole, boreholes, silos, then reactors, pits and trenches, sewers or drains, and chambers and ducting. So, if a worker has, now how do you say a worker has entered a confined space? If a worker has either put his head or maybe the lower part of the body is inside the space, or maybe his upper portion or a full body is inside the space, then he is considered that he has entered the confined space. So, then he has to follow all the safety protocols with regard to the confined space. So, now is it possible to really list out all the confined spaces? Generally, it is not possible to list out all the confined spaces, because some places are termed confined only during construction or maybe during fabrication or during modification and so on. It is not a complete confined space altogether. So, confined spaces should have certain of these characteristics, then it is called confined space, and once it is termed as confined space, then all the safety protocols of the confined spaces has to follow. What are the typical hazards in confined space? You may have flammable atmosphere, you may have explosive atmosphere, there may be toxic substances which may be like dangerous or poisonous gases in the form of gas, vapor or fumes likely to be present. You may have oxygen deficiency or you may have oxygen excess also. Maybe if you have chosen a wrong breathing apparatus, that can also be a real serious hazard. And then when you talk about gases, different gases can be at different levels. Okay. So, suppose if I have a confined space, this may be the confined space, you may have larger density gases in the bottom, then this, and then there may be 3 layers. Okay. So, based on the depth, you may have to differentiate the layers of the confined space and do the gas detectors for testing the levels of gases at all these 3 layers. Then only you can really detect the presence of the particular gas which is inside the confined space. And the workers should be taking a portable gas detector also. Suppose if the gas levels are changing periodically, they are advised to take portable gas detectors while they are working inside the confined space. Other hazards in confined spaces are engulfment, excess of heat, lack of natural light, no ventilation, restricted entry and exit. So, suppose if there is an emergency, they may not find a place to quickly come out of the hazard. So, that is also a real big danger in terms of a confined space. Never go into a confined space alone. So, confined spaces will have so many risks. Okay. Now, first thing that we should always, we are always talking about is PPE, and I have been telling PPE can minimize many of the severe hazards. So, what are the required PPE in terms of confined spaces? As usual, you may have to have the required PPE, the minimal PPE which are required, and especially for confined spaces there are some additional PPEs recommended. For example, respirators. Okay, respirators are generally in two forms when you talk about confined spaces. One is supplied air respirators and the other one is air purifying respirators. When your oxygen level is deficient, then you may have to carry oxygen along with your mask, so which comes something like this, and then you may have to enter a tunnel or a confined space. Sometimes the air may be toxic, or it is not suitable for breathing, then you may have to carry an air purifying apparatus which need not come with the cylinder, it is only for purifying the air. So, the mask will actually purify the air which you are breathing in. Another thing is always recommended to have a full safety harness, and this safety harness along with the lifeline. So, as shown in these two figures. So, this safety harness is having a full body safety harness along with the lifeline. So, which is connected in a tripod format. Okay. So, this is a tripod format with which the worker has to enter, and there should be a standby worker on the outside who should be able to see any signal which is communicated by the worker inside the confined space to the person outside. Okay. And this person also should be capable of pulling out the worker in terms of in case of an emergency. Okay. So, now let us talk about before you enter confined spaces. First of all, you should know what are the hazards and how to manage all those hazards. Confined spaces are really a life threatening danger, and entry generally is only by permit. Okay. So, there are two types of confined space. One is called permit required confined spaces and the other one is a non-permit required confined spaces. Non-permit required confined spaces also require some restrictions, and not everybody is allowed to enter, but there need not be too much of there is no presence of too many dangerous issues inside. In a permit required confined spaces, there may be too many suspected to have too many hazard levels and risks. So, for people to enter, and hence you will have restricted entry and access. You may not be allowed to stay for a longer time, or two or more workers may not be allowed to enter. So, these are some of the issues with regard to permit required entry spaces. And before you even go for a permit or a non-permit, better you should really see whether such an entry into confined spaces is really required or not. Okay. So, suppose if you can alter the work and do the same work outside the confined space, then you should go ahead in doing it rather than taking all the risks and entering a confined space to carry out a specific task. So, permit required confined spaces are the most hazardous and require any qualified person to complete a safety checklist. Simply call a permit before you enter in the space, and a trench more than 4 feet depth is generally termed as a permit required confined spaces, because it may contain harmful substances and gases. Entry permit requirement: what are the minimum things you need to have in the entry? Identification and location of the confined space. Sometimes you may have too many confined spaces, you have to have an identification and location, and outside the confined space this permit has to be stuck on the wall or near to the confined space, so that people who are close by should be aware that some people have already entered a confined space and they are actually working inside for this specific task and so on. So, purpose of entering the confined space: time at which the worker is supposed to enter, duration of his stay, what are the ventilation arrangements the worker has taken in, what are the lighting arrangements the worker has taken in, what is the air quality of the particular place. All these should be monitored first, and it should be listed along with the entry permit. Only everything is done and proper values, then only the worker is allowed to enter the confined space. Safety inspections, gas test also has to be done, and this work permit along with the signature of the foreman, competent person, it actually is stuck on the wall, okay, near to the confined space. Confined spaces are dangerous places and never go without a permit. Most often it is better to not to enter a confined space without a proper work permit. Before entering the confined spaces, some of the issues: number one, isolation. So, if possible, disconnect and properly lock off the power supply and all other issues, and the machinery or the part which you are going to work has to be really isolated, so that you are actually preventing all the hazards in the confined space entering into your work area. So, disconnect and properly lock off the power supply of all machinery and equipment that could cause hazards in a confined space, and blank off pipelines, service lines which can also cause hazards. So, try to isolate the portion of the area which you want to work in simpler way, that is what it is. Okay. And try to take effective steps to prevent ingress or inrush to the confined space of hazardous gas, vapor, dust, fume, etc. Cleaning and cooling before entry. Ensure that no sludge or other deposits will give off hazardous gas, vapor, dust or fume during the course of work. If the steam cleaning is used, then sufficient time should be given for cooling of the whole chamber before you enter into the confined space. When the size of the entrance is too narrow, then you should also have a proper airline breathing apparatus, and that also should be carried along with you. And when you are taking an air breathing apparatus, you should also know that it can restrict the passage or movement of the workers. Provision of ventilation. Increase the number of openings to improve the ventilation. Mechanical ventilation may be necessary in many of the places to ensure adequate supply of fresh air, and do not use oxygen to freshen up the air, because this may have a risk of explosion also. Testing of the air should be free from toxic and flammable gases, and if there is no deficiency in oxygen, then the air is fit to breathe. So, you should be testing the air quality properly, and the testing also should be carried out by a competent person using a suitable gas detector, because the type of gas detectors also is very critical, because you are detecting the atmospheric condition based on the detector, which should be properly and accurately calibrated. Further precaution: better to carry an air monitoring device, which is a portable device, as and when required, should be taken along with the workers, and who should be able to know the air quality when they are inside the confined space. Provision of special tools and lighting. Non-sparking tools and specially protected lighting systems are essential, and where flammable or potential explosive atmospheres are likely to be present. So, before entering the confined space, again some more additional instructions. Number one is emergency plan. You should have a proper emergency evacuation plan. Again, these emergency evacuation plan also should be properly designed by the competent person, and should be formally workable and so on. Those all evaluation policies also has to be cross checked before entering a confined space. And sufficient supply of approved breathing apparatus, vessels containing oxygen or air, then safety harness and audio visual alarm, etc., should all be properly ensured. Okay. And the people outside the confined space should also be able to hear some of the signals which is given from the workers who have entered the confined space. So, everything should be properly planned in advance before entering the confined space. Apart from that, emergency services or procedures like fire services, first aid, all should be available at a close vicinity before a worker has entered a confined space. Communications, and the workers who have entered who are ready for entering a confined space should know when there is an emergency, what is a way to communicate to the workers, standby workers who are outside the confined space, and how to raise an alarm, how to give audio signals, or how to communicate through some means or the other, which is pre-planned and well in place between the people who are outside the confined space and the workers who have entered the confined space. Shutdown. In case of emergency which has already happened, what is the way to shut down and what all has to be shut down, all these should be planned in advance before entering a confined space. Liaison and rescue. So, when the work is being carried out, okay, so as shown here, so in a confined space there should be another standby worker. You can see the standby worker as seen in this photo should be assigned to station outside the confined space to maintain the communication. So, there is a worker who is entered the confined space and there is a worker who is outside, and both these workers should have all the PPEs including safety harnesses to rescue the worker who has entered. So, this rescue personnel should be properly trained in rescue, physically fit to and readily available to carry out any rescue operations and rescuing the worker in case of any emergency. And there are 6 types of all these rescue practices: opening less than 24 or opening greater than 24. Okay, it can be side portal, it can be top portal, or it can be bottom portal. Accordingly, you will have rescue devices set in place. Okay. And the rescue generally is called tripod rescue. It is of 3 categories. Number 1 is self rescue, the next one is non-entry rescue, and the third one is entry rescue. Self rescue is the worker who has entered the confined space, he himself would be able to come out of the confined space in case of any danger. That is primarily called self rescue. Non-entry rescue is the standby worker will try to help or assist the worker who has entered the confined space, but he will not enter into the confined space. So, without entry he will try to rescue the worker who is inside the hazard. Third one is entry rescue. In this case, the standby worker has to enter the confined space to rescue the worker who is inside the confined space. Again, there are so many types of rescuing. Okay, you can have blanket rescue, you can have full through legs, you can trap the worker and push him out. Okay, like this there are so many options of rescuing the worker. All these instructions and training should be given to the worker before the entry to the confined space happens. The primary operation where this confined space is predominant, we will just look at tunneling construction. Okay, because these days metro constructions are really popular, and let us now discuss a little on the hazards with regard to tunneling operation. Tunnel is generally not linked to metro or a railway project. Tunnel is primarily an underground passage, and it can be anywhere. It can be through a mountain or beneath the city or under a waterway. It can be in any form, and it may be for pedestrians, cyclists, or road traffic, motor vehicles, railway traffic, or for a canal. And some tunnels are constructed primarily for carrying water also, or for sewers or other hydroelectric purposes, or maybe even for telecommunication cables and so on. Okay. The choice of tunnel, again it depends on geological conditions, hydrological conditions, cross section, length of the tunnel, all these matters. Okay. Limits of surface disturbance and how you want to put up the equipment and so on. Accordingly, the choice of tunneling happens. Now, if you broadly see, there are several types of tunneling construction methods. Number 1 is cut and cover method. We will discuss about drilling and blasting, and also on TBM method of excavation and immersed tube tunnels. These are the 4 types I am going to show here. In cut and cover, there are simple, I made the process into simpler 4 steps, okay, as given in literature. Number 1, first you have to put the sheet piles or diaphragm walls. So, these are the sheet piles, okay, and diaphragm walls and or pipe walls, so are installed to support the excavation. Step number 2, when the excavation starts continuing here, okay, to the bottom of the tunnel, temporary road decks as seen here may be put up or placed on the existing road surface, and this road can be opened up for smooth vehicular or pedestrian flow. Okay. So, simultaneously what happened, construction of station concourse and platforms will start continuing underneath the temporary road decks, and in parallel you may also continue with other areas of excavation, and the process starts continuing. Once the road surface is reinstated and after the construction of the station concourse and platform is fully completed, you can do the backfilling and make the permanent road, so that the normal road is actually made available. This is primarily called cut and cover method. Primarily you are cutting and covering and then allowing the movement of tunneling construction to happen. The next is drilling and blasting. Even today this is a very popular method, but once the advent of TBM has been launched, drilling and blasting is not done very frequently in almost all tunnels. So, before the launch of TBM, drilling and blasting was one of the method when you want to build up a tunneling. So, before the advent of TBM, this was the only economical way of excavating long tunnels where any type of material inside the soil strata was visible, even including hard rock, and digging is not possible. Okay. So, here again there are 4 simpler steps. Drill the holes in the tunnel, okay, put proper holes and then start installing the explosives. So, keep the explosives like this and detonate the explosives. So, it starts blasting and all the debris and the soil spoil, you actually take it up through dump trucks and it is all transported away. Number 4th step is install and support the proper tunnel with tunnel lining, and you are ready for the next blast to happen, and keep moving with the tunnel construction progress. The next is TBM. TBM is nothing but tunnel boring machine. So, it works underground with less noise, dust, vibration, and TBM is generally preoccupied with all the equipments and setups. So, you need not have an additional setup for transporting and doing anything, because it can do the whole operation with the machine on its own. And disruption and minimize the impact of the community and traffic. So, it is highly efficient compared to other methods due to several work procedures that can occur simultaneously. It itself can cut, okay, and take off all the mud outside and deposit it in an other place, and it can also have concrete precast segments with which it forms a tunnel lining also is generally placed with the TBM itself. Okay. Now, what are the 4 steps here also? So, primarily you have to put a launching shaft and a retrieval shaft. So, shaft is nothing but the first initial excavation you do vertically down, so that the TBM can be placed. Okay. So, you have to have 2 locations, launching and retrieval shaft. Then second step is assemble the TBM in the launching shaft. Okay. So, like this the TBM setup is done. Okay, you bring parts from different parts of the world and assemble and keep it ready in this place. The third step, start cutting and excavating the tunnel, okay, as it is seen here, and it starts moving ahead. So, this excavation of tunnel is happening without any disturbance to any of the buildings or any adjoining structures which is above the tunneling, and the TBM starts moving and arrives at the receiving shaft, and then it is dismantled for transportation. Okay. If it has to continue, then it keeps on continuing like this. So, recently this is a very famous method of tunneling construction. The next one is immersed tube tunnels, wherein you have to do a tunnel, placing of a tunnel inside or under the seabed or inside a water body. Okay. That is the main issue here. So, typically a immersed tunnel is made up of sinking precast concrete boxes. So, these are the precast concrete boxes. Okay. Generally you use lot of ships to guide the setup. Okay. You bring it to the place where it has to be dropped, and its own self height it just gets dropped down, and with the help of lining agents it just becomes watertight and seals off the water, so that there is no ingress of water inside. Okay. So, first step you have to do trench dredging, and first you clear off the soil below. You can use any equipments like for example your clamshells or drag line, okay, anything is used. This is primarily a clamshell, and you start immersing the tube units, okay, with the help of lay barge. You first fix the directions and set up this, and then you place all the precast box units together, and along with the sealants it starts getting watertight sealed, and then you can start backfilling the earth over it, so that it is ready as a tunnel. Now, safety precautions, especially in terms of tunneling. Now, let us talk about safety personnel. There are primarily 2 safety personnel. One is a competent person, another one is a certified worker. Competent person, we call it as a competent foreman. So, this foreman should be able to execute all the operations inside the tunnel or a shaft very safely. Shafts are the vertical excavation which we do, and tunnel is primarily the horizontal excavation which we do. Okay. So, whether it is inside a shaft or inside a tunnel, the competent foreman should be able to execute the job very safely. In larger jobs, the responsibilities and functions in the respect of safety arrangements may be delegated to an independent, qualified and a competent supervisor. Safety committee shall also be appointed when there are 100 or more workers are employed in tunneling operation, and this committee has to meet once in 15 days to discuss all the safety problems in the site work. Okay. Certified workers, and these workers are specially trained for to take care of themselves in terms of even self rescue and so on, and when there is any accident or something, they should be also trained to report the same accident to the site supervisors. Okay. And any incident, what all has to be informed, okay, and how to take care of themselves in case of any hazard approaching the tunnel. So, all these workers are generally trained well in advance, and they are primarily called certified workers. The next issue when you are entering a tunnel is you should have a proper first aid arrangement. A first aid arrangement has to be kept for any injured worker. So, it should be maintained in every work site, and it should be available for emergency. Okay. At a quick reach, it has to be reaching to the injured worker. Depending on magnitude of the work, the availability of ambulance also should be available at a very short notice shall be there, and at least one experienced first aid attendant should be there, and who can take care of these injured workers. Okay. It is recommended generally the workers, foreman, supervisor also should know how to deal with first aid methods to avoid any serious impact onto any of the accident which happened inside. Stretchers, other equipment necessary to remove the injured workers also should be available, and when there are more than 50 person working in a shift, artificial respiration arrangements also should be provided, and PPE, all the person who are entering the tunnel should wear a proper PPE. Okay. Now, next comes sanitation and drinking water. So, sanitation facilities shall be provided close by. Now, it depends on the length of the tunnel, okay, whether at what interval you want to keep the closets. Okay. So, dry closets or water closets or closet cars can be provided in the tunnel, okay, at the scale of 1 unit for every 50 men in the shift, okay, unless it is practically impossible. Closets shall be regularly cleaned, and they should be effectively cleaned. Disinfectants also should be provided. In any case, the entire tunnel should also be treated with disinfectants periodically to have any unhygienic situations removed. Okay. Next, drinking water. So, at least 5 liters per person employed in a shift. Drinking water facility should be given in the tunnel, and especially when you are inside a very long tunnels, and it should be stored in a clean container with a tight fitting lid. And material handling. So, those material required for the work in progress alone should be kept inside the tunnel, and all other material shall be removed and kept outside. Okay, even if there is sufficient space, still all the other material which are not required for the work progress should be all kept outside. Okay, and the workers should be able to have clear space free of any obstacles to escape in case of any mishap which happens inside the tunnel, especially when you are having flammable liquids or something which is required, should not be stored inside a tunnel, and it should be under the supervision of a qualified person. All the combustible material including rubbish should be continuously removed from such areas. Okay, and spills of flammable liquids all shall be cleared up immediately. Containers of all the flammable liquid shall be tightly capped and closed. So, all sources of ignition shall be prohibited in areas where flammable liquids are stored, handled and processed. Fire extinguishers and fire buckets also should be provided in case of all these hazardous materials are present. Next is communication facilities. Communication can be in different formats. Number 1 is telephone system and the warning signals. Telephone, it shall be provided to ensure a positive and a quick method of communication. So, between all control locations and portal of the tunnels, and when you are longer than 500 meters, and for shafts when it is longer than 50 meters in depth. Warning signals. So, irrespective of length and the bends in the tunnel, you should have a proper arrangement for transmitting and communicating any message you want to give to the people outside. It can be electrically operated bells or it can be a walkie talkie. So, whatever form you can still you should be able to communicate to the people outside. So, up to 100 meters length of the tunnel, only one of the system mentioned above shall be provided, and whereas when you have tunnel length which is more than 100 meters, at least 2 or more communication systems and warning systems should be in place. Okay. Red and green lights of adequate size, brightness and provided at suitable intervals on straight lengths, curves, crossover points, etc. to regulate the construction traffic. Red is primarily for stop and green is for slowing down. Okay. So, like this communication is primarily given to for the all the locomotives and other traffic which comes inside the tunnel. Communication systems shall be subject to daily checks whether it is properly serviced or whether it is properly maintained. So, otherwise service is required and it should be in place every day before the tunneling operation starts. The communication systems should be properly checked. Now, what about electrical installation and lighting? So, all parts of electrical installation shall be constructed, installed and maintained to prevent of any electric shock, fire hazard and so on, and it should also be having adequate strength so that it is not getting damaged with the underground conditions and other issues like water, dust and thermal reaction or chemical reaction and so on, and wherever possible it should be properly insulated and shall have all live parts enclosed. So, primarily in terms of switchboards, there should be a passage of not less than 60 centimeters wide should be maintained in front of the switchboards, and rubber mats should be placed in front of the switchboards, and no person should be using the switchboard as like a clock room or change room or a locker room or a storage room, and that should be totally prohibited. And all electrical equipment shall bear the essential details of voltage, amperes and circuit diagrams and so on. As far as possible, the combustible material shall not be used in any room where there is electrical apparatus kept there. No flammable materials also shall be stored in rooms, recesses or compartments which contains electrical apparatus. So, try to segregate the hazards which are put together. Adequate fire extinguishing equipment suitable for using on all live parts should also be readily kept, and that should be tested at least once in a month. When fire breaks out, the supply of electricity should be cut off immediately, and the fire should be attacked as soon as possible and reported to the nearest available supervisor. All places where electrical apparatus is installed shall be adequately ventilated in order to ensure proper cooling of the apparatus and dilution of flammable gases are ensured. Minimum of 50 lux is maintained inside the tunnel and shaft headings, especially while drilling, mucking or other scaling operations. The lighting in general inside the tunnel or outside an approach road shall not be less than 10 lumens. This is how the lighting efficiency is calculated. Okay. Emergency lights shall be installed at the working phases and at intervals along the tunnel to help escape of workmen in case of accidents. All supervisors and gangmates shall be provided with cap lamps or a hand torch, and at least a crew of 50 or 10 people should be accommodated with a hand torch or a cap torch. Temporary lights, most tunnels are wet or damp and providing a so it should be provided with a proper grounding material to prevent short circuits. Electrocutions in tunnels are too frequent, so all switches located inside a tunnel should be properly grounded and earthed. Hand lamps should also be having a strong cover glass and transparent material, and it should also be of waterproof material. Communication inside a tunnel, notices and signs. So, there should be a very big notice board of 45 by 30 centimeters which shows about the unauthorized person entering electrical equipment rooms or maybe handling or interfering with electrical apparatus. A notice on the notice board of size 60 by 90 centimeters should be placed for directions in case of fire and directions to rescue of persons in contact with live conductors and for restoration of people suffering from electric shock. And also there should be sufficient signboards to notify in case of electrical accident or dangerous occurrences. Suitable warnings should be placed at most of the places where contact with proximity to electric equipments can cause danger. Telephone lines should always be placed in the opposite of electric side in the tunnels, and no blasting line shall preferably be laid within 3 meters of the light and the power line. All supervisors and electricians shall be adequately trained in the manual application of artificial respiration to persons suffering from electric shock and should be aware of the necessity to immediate and continued application. A board of instructions for artificial respiration shall also be hung at a visible place for so that people are aware of how to use the respirators. Now, let us discuss about shaft excavation. So, head frame. So, it shall be preferably of steel structure because it has to withstand the heavy load and with sufficient headroom and strong enough for possible overload and impact due to sudden drops. Hoisting equipment, this should be inspected at least once in a week and maintained. Suitable standby supply, power supply arrangement or alternate means of working on the hoist shall also be provided. A limit switch and a non-failing automatic brake shall be provided on the hoist to control the speed. There shall be a fencing around the shaft opening at least 90 centimeters high, and it shall comprise of at least 2 rail guards and a tow board 15 centimeters high to prevent material from falling into the shaft. Okay. And the gate provided there shall be closed except when used for entering or leaving the shaft or emptying the buckets, and the gate should preferably automatic so that by mistake you do not leave the gate open. Access through shafts, person shall not be lowered or raised in bucket used for mucking, and there should be a proper manned rider which should be available for accessing the people from entering the shaft and leaving the shaft. A reliable means of communication such as bells or whistles shall always be maintained between the bottom of the shaft and the surface, and telephone can also be used wherever possible. Any other code of signal used shall also be conspicuously exhibited near the workplace or entrance, okay, especially when you are doing on shaft excavation. Handling water. So, as and when you start excavating, you know water can be accumulating and it is a very serious hazard. So, study of boring data and geological formations has to be properly taken care of to have an indication of locations where water can be expected. Water inflow can be reduced or entirely it should be stopped by several means of water expulsion methods. Okay. In case of steady flow of water from the roof or side of the tunnel, the flow shall be deflected down the sides to sumps by metal sheets, and wherever possible you should have a permanent shielding of water entering into the shaft area. In case of steeply inclined tunnels, steps should be taken for quick exit in case of failure or haulage, and gutters and sumps shall be kept clean so that you are actually taking off the water and diverting the water accumulation. Ventilation in tunnels. Ventilation is required because it is totally a confined space to remove polluted air, flammable gases or toxic substances, even dust, okay, which is caused with the help of disintegration of rock or through drilling and other processes. And sometimes you may also have exhaust gases because of equipment like locomotives, dump trucks and shovels etc. are actually entering in and leaving. Okay. So, ventilation is very critical in terms of tunneling. Mechanical ventilation shall also be adopted wherever necessary to force the air in or exhaust the air out from the working phase to the portals through a pipe. And ventilation and exhaust systems for tunnel and shaft excavation shall be of sufficient capacity to maintain adequate supply of uncontaminated pure air at all times in the tunnel or in the shaft. Dust control, again you have to periodically inspect the quality of air inside the tunnel, and most wherever applicable try to go for wet drilling methods because dust will not be too much in a wet drilling method. Periodical medical checkup of the workers are also to be ensured so that they are actually safe with all the pollution caused because of the dust, and these checkups should be done at least once in 3 months. The concentration of various gases as given by the IS code and other SOPs. Oxygen not less than 19.5%, carbon monoxide not more than 0.005%, carbon dioxide not more than 0.5%, nitrogen fumes not more than 0.0005%, methane not more than 0.5% at any place inside the tunnel, and hydrogen sulfide not more than 0.001%. So, this levels has to be maintained, and testing should be carried out after 24 hours or at least after every blast or a major rock fall or any hazard has happened inside the tunnel. Now, there are certain entrance requirements which are required for people entering a tunnel. For example, without a proper PPE, the workers are not allowed to enter inside a tunnel. Okay. For example, like helmet, safety shoes, high visibility vest, okay, and other hearing protection and all, they are not allowed to enter inside a tunnel, although there is a proper work permit. Single person are not allowed to work inside a confined space. Visitors are allowed only with permission along with the guides, and after attending safety induction course, then only they are allowed. Even then, maximum of 5 visitors at one time into the TBM only are allowed. Okay. And also there is a tally board which shows how many people have entered the tunnel and what is the count of number of workers inside the tunnel. Okay. So, these tally boards will have an out column and an in column and lot of tokens. So, you pick up 2 tokens against your name and put it as out or in as per whether you are entering or leaving the tunnel. And as soon as you enter the tunnel, you can leave the token in some place on the notice board, and again you can use it for putting the tally marks. Okay. This is like compulsory when you are entering into a tunneling space. The next one is entry is generally with the help of passenger hoist. Okay. So, this passenger hoist capacity is maximum of 12 persons as seen here, and the safe load is cantilever platform is generally 6 person. So, when you are riding in the hoist, stay and keep clear from moving parts and so on. Okay. And not smoking is compulsory inside a tunneling space. Shaft safety bottom, do not stand under the loads being lifted or lowered. When you hear or see any warning signs, there are a lot of communication signals like this inside a shaft. Okay. You have to follow all the signals at all times, and be aware of sensitive to any locomotive movement also when you are inside the tunnel. Warning light for lifting. So, you can see here these are the warning lights which are kept when the lifting operation is carried away. This is primarily a shaft opening. Okay. So, red light will turn on automatically when the crane is on top for any lifting operations, and ensure no lifting when you cross the shaft. Okay. Or otherwise you should wait till the lifting operation is completed. The access and egress in the tunnel, use proper walkway as provided. You can see here it is all brightly colored so that it is visible. Do not walk on the train track and only ride in the man rider. Capacity is 22 persons at any point of time. Tunnels are always wet and slippery. Okay. Always stay in designated areas and not venturing out into the tunneling spaces. Be aware of material spills, okay, from wagons or conveyors. They all take off the material. Okay. Conveyors generally used to collect the mud and other spoils from the after the TBM machine has cut. So, these are generally carried by conveyors, and wagons also help it for traveling, for taking these spoils outside the tunnel. Okay. So, you should be very careful with the spillage so that you are not slipping and falling into the tunnel. And on every time you should be very alert on the tunnel haulage equipment which comes in along the tracks. Hauling equipment always has a right of way. So, you should always strictly follow the procedures and maintain the right of way distance. Warning signs, obey all warning signs posted in the various locations inside the tunneling spaces. There will be visible and audible warning signs also when hazardous operations are carried out. General tunnel safety rules, operate equipment or plant if you are authorized, otherwise you should not be trying out operating any equipment. Do not tamper with the equipment and mess up with the functioning of the same equipment. Do not walk in tunnel invert, always use walkways or a man rider. Do not throw any material from heights. Keep clear of welders working area. Do not look directly at the arc during welding operations, and report all accidents or incidents to safety department. So, these are general instructions. Now, safety into the tunnels, location of emergency telephone. So, primarily the fire alarm box or intercom telephones, you should know the locations and places. Location of fire extinguishers and fire hose reels. So, fire extinguishers generally of the ABC type is generally available at the TBM, locomotives, man riders, shaft bottom and hoist and transformers. A standard hose reel of 30 meters is available and fixed at every 50 meters. And location of self rescuers, 25 number of self rescuers are provided in the TBM. Okay. And these notices regarding the proper use of self rescuers are posted near the storage area, so that when there is any emergency, the workers will know how to use the self rescue equipment and come out of the hazard. Location of first aid boxes, and all the first aiders list are also available in the notice boards. What are the tools inside the first aid box are also listed outside the first aid box. The locomotive and train traffic, only trained and authorized people are supposed to operate the locomotives. This is what we have seen earlier, and obey all the instructions from the locomotive drivers. Do not sit on locomotives or rolling stocks which are not designed for man riding, but only for material transportation. Do not use it, and do not stand behind a reversing a wagon or a locomotives. Okay. And the train speed, a empty train going into a TBM 15 kilometers per hour, full train coming from the TBM 10 kilometers per hour, full train approaching within 100 meters of shaft bottom or TBM 5 kilometers per hour, and when a machine is entering a TBM, it should be coming in a dead slow speed, and when it is moving through a track switch, it should again be a dead slow. Again there are lot of warning signals, 1 horn blast for locomotive stopping, 2 horn blasts for moving in, 3 horn blasts for moving out, and so on. Okay. And also there are lot of visual signals also available. Okay. Rules and regulations for man riders, maximum of 22 persons are allowed to travel during normal operation. All doors should be closed before the loco movement. Do not place hand or head outside the man rider, and board or alight only when the locomotive has stopped. Okay. Then railway tracks, again no track works are permitted when the crew is in operation, and also red signal for stop and green signal for slow speed, and there should be a lookout person also who has a proper lamp or a torch to give proper signals to the locomotive driver, and who should be positioned at 50 meters on either side. Okay. So, there will be lot of lookout persons. Safety in the TBM, conveyor hazards, maintenance and repair work should be done, because conveyors are generally carrying out the material and also the precast panels. Okay. So, should be very careful with the conveyor hazards, and it should be properly maintained, so that it is transporting. There should be proper emergency stop ropes also provided in case of emergency to stop the conveyor belt. Restarting of belt should be from the TBM operator cabin only, and be aware of mud spillage, and keep hands and body clear of conveyors. Wear protective gear whenever advised, and operators are advised to wear snug fitting clothing, so that the clothing is not getting caught into the conveyor belts. Safety in TBM, you will primarily have segment handling, segment erection, and thrust or jacking ramps. Segment handling, only authorized people are allowed to handle the segments, and persons must stay out of the areas beneath the hanging or supported loads. Segment erection, crossing of safety barriers are not allowed, and be aware of crushing, pinching or impacting processes which happens there. And during ring construction, the zone around the erector must be visible to the erector. Okay. So, primarily this is how the tunneling happens. Okay. And if you want to show the cross section, this is how the TBM looks like. Okay. And these are the blades, different sort of the blades which starts cutting out the earth, okay, which is in front. And there are two conveyors here, one for taking out the debris or the soil, and the other one is for transporting all your precast panels. Okay. Once the soil is cleared or excavated, these panels are placed all along the tunnel, so that lining is maintained. Okay. So, this is primarily called segment, okay, and this is the erection of the segments. So, crossing of safety and here, so during the ring construction, so this is the ring construction, the zone around the erector must be visible to the erector, so that he is properly placing all the lining parts, and do not stay in the zone when the concrete lining is happening, when the tunnel lining is happening. Safety in TBM, operation of grout pumps. Only authorized person are allowed to enter or operate grout pumps. Never reach into moving parts when the motor is running. This is primarily called a grout pump. An operator must inform unnecessary people to keep out of the danger zone. Okay, never try to open while the grout is under pressure. Hoist and lifting gears in TBM. The hoist must only be used for transport of material. Do not lift people with the help of a hoist, okay, and do not stand the suspended loads, and only authorized people are allowed to operate and maintain the lifting hoist and lifting gears. Okay. Electrical parts, again all electrical safety precautions should be maintained in a TBM. Emergency in tunnels, types of emergency which you can foresee in a tunnel are ground collapse, failure of temporary or permanent support, flooding or leaking from utilities, gas releases, fires and explosion, oxygen deficiency, building or surface subsidence, accidents from moving part of the equipment, plant and power failures or collapse, electrical hazard. In case of emergency, evacuation is necessary. Procedures should be well established before you enter the confined space. Trained rescue personnel also you should be available for rescuing all the workers, and look for all the symbols and all the warnings when you are inside the tunneling space. Evacuation procedures may be by man cage and emergency access ladders. Okay, the evacuation procedure is generally by the supervisor or the foreman who knows the procedure of evacuating the people, and he should have a formal plan well in advance as to how the evacuation has to happen. Now, let us move on to trenchless construction methods. So, every time there is no need to dig a trench, okay, maybe for pipe laying or something else. Okay. So, even now there are a lot of trenchless construction methods which are available, wherein you have to dig open only a small launching shaft, put the micro tunneling boring machine, and then you can use pipe jacking for all your processes, and you can go ahead with laying of tunnels, small diameter tunnels. Okay. These trenchless construction methods are again of two categories. One is trenchless construction method, other one is trenchless rehabilitation method. Trenchless construction method always has a micro tunneling processes which we use with the help of MTBM, which is called micro tunnel boring machine, and along with the pipe jacks. Okay, pipe jacks are nothing but small diameter pipes, okay, which are all precast, and it starts fixing up and tunneling is completely done once you start cutting off the earth. The other method is trenchless rehabilitation methods. You primarily use it for pipe bursting or for pipe jetting processes, and when you want to repair a pipeline, okay, you need not cut the earth and then look for the pipe and take out the old pipe and then insert the new pipe. You can actually force the new pipe along the same line where the old pipe is there, and with the help of the bursting process, that is why it is called pipe bursting, the new pipe gets aligned in the same place as the old pipe, and the old pipe gets broken in its own place. Okay. You generally do not remove the old pipe, the debris are generally inside the soil only. So, this is right now a very powerful approach wherein lot of construction or underground construction and rehabilitation works, primarily for smaller diameter or small depth of excavation, people prefer trenchless construction. Okay. So, there is also a saying, why to dig a trench when there is a trenchless operation available. So, this is primarily the MTBM and the way it is done. This is the launching shaft, this is a receiving shaft. Okay. And here compared to the TBM, there is no process of cutting the earth in a dry mechanism. Here water is sprayed, and as such the water gets mixed with the soil in front and it becomes sticky, and as a result the soil is cut. Okay, the process of cutting the earth itself is very different compared to TBM machines. Okay, and also they have smaller cutter blades here, but it cuts along with the water. So, there are two lines which enters in, one is for water and the other one is for the mixed water mixed with soil, okay, which is actually transported outside. Okay, and with the help of all the signals given from the top, there is a pipe jacks, these are all the pipes. Okay, and with the help of proper launching mechanism, these pipe shafts are fit in, and with the hydraulic pressure it starts getting moved, and as and when the tunneling operation is proceeded. Okay, and at the end of the receiving shaft, the MTBM machine is taken out. Okay, this is the general setup of a micro tunneling processes. Now, what are the safe procedure in a trenchless construction? All trenchless crossing of pipelines through roadways, highways, railways, all should be properly and identified, and there should be a proper permission also from the proper authorities before you start doing the trenchless work. Emergency preparedness, specific training of the workmen on the job are mandatory. All workmen should be provided with basic, mandatory and specific PPEs for doing out all these work, apart from ventilation, illumination and other requirements as per the environment. The sloping and shoring or any suitable technique for preventing collapse of soil also should be in place. The machines and the equipment used in this process shall be kept at a distance which is not less than the depth of the pit. And the pits are all hard barricaded, light reflecting tapes in order to prevent other obstructions entering into the construction processes. Ladder or any suitable device for escaping from the entry are all provided for entry and leaving the pits. Power supply also should be maintained, hand lamps also should be used inside, and voltage for the hand lamps shall be restricted to 24 volts, and all the equipments shall be properly earthed. SOP for the shaft construction: before construction you have to note down the underground utilities and within the range of excavation, and the work must be commenced with proper work permit, and all clearances are required from the local authorities. The traffic management procedures all should be adopted to suit the requirements particular to the site. Again, workmen should have proper PPE, proper ventilation even for the shaft construction. Okay, and most of the others are looking like same, and the proper access and egress arrangements are all provided with the ladders, and ensure LOTO is there. LOTO is lockout and tag out procedures, we will discuss along with electrical hazards. Ensure weekly inspection of shaft covers against displacement, disorder, deformation or other defects. Jacking installation: jacking equipment and other machinery can be installed by using cranes, and the crane shall be operated from at least a depth of 6 meters away from the shaft depth, or at least a distance of at least 6 meters away if the depth is greater than 6 meters. Trained person has to be deployed for signaling the crane operator. Ensure there is no movement of workmen within the swing area of the crane. Rotating parts of the crane are all shielded. The crane is equipped with the back horn, de-energized power source while working under live cable. Noise protection equipment are provided to the workmen based on the noise levels during the jacking operation. Air quality has to be checked, okay, and other proper precautions on vibration, heat effects all should be there. Better to have the workers done in shifts, so that this will be a better solution for all these hazards. Recap on confined space: if you are required to work in a tank, a manhole, a well or a cold storage, culvert, pipeline or vault, tunnel and so on, then you are actually working in a confined space. Okay, you may have lack of oxygen or even high dosage of oxygen, toxic atmosphere, temperature extremes, fire and explosion, uncontrolled energy, collapse of solids or liquids. Like this, there are some more hazards which may be available. Work safely in confined spaces: you should know about standby worker and also about the rescue operations, types of rescues also we have seen, and there should be a proper SCBA, which is nothing but self contained respiratory apparatus, alarm horn, everything should be there outside the confined space also. Testing the atmosphere is compulsory when you are entering a confined space, which also we have discussed. Isolation, try to isolate the portion which you wanted to work. Fire and explosion prevention should be maintained, and fire alarms, fire explosive devices all should be in place, including first aid services and so on. Ventilation is compulsory, especially when you are working in a confined space. Okay. So, confined space, entry by permit, identify hazards of the permit spaces, de-energize and lock out all energy sources, drain, clean and ventilate the confined space, isolate the confined space. Oxygen level should be between 19.5 to 23%, flammable gases less than 10%, all substances below established permissible exposure limit. Okay. Prepare personal protection devices as respirator, protective clothing, lifeline, safety harness. Attendant and rescue equipment should be placed outside the confined spaces. Review communication procedures and obtain an authorized permit. Okay. In a nutshell, we have discussed all of these things in this particular lecture, and I have taken this, I have prepared this complete lecture based on all these references. Okay. IS code on 4756, safety for tunneling, and more of OSHA material on quick card and fact sheets on permit required confined spaces in construction, crawl spaces and attics, construction pits and so on, and lot of safe operating procedures given from DMRC and L&T. Okay. Thank you. Bye.